Welcome to the 26th Annual Lucas Oil International Drag Racing Hall of Fame. We're going to induct 6 people into the Hall of Fame tonight. All have done something and made some sort of contribution to our sport over their career. And what a lot of you people may not know, on the grounds of the museum is this huge granite monument put in place by Sandy Miner and Larry Miner way back in the 80s. And this monument will have the engraved names of the recipients tonight. All of the names of the people who are in the Hall of Fame are engraved on this monument. With that being said, let's go now to Gainesville and get on with the ceremony.
Well, you know what they say, behind every good man is a good woman. And in drag racing, it has to be especially true because we spend a lot of time on the road. We have a lot of long working hours. We have terrible accidents. And you know, to raise a family and under those kind of conditions takes a special person. And so it's very fitting that tonight that award go to none other than John Force's wife, Mrs. Force.
I can look back over the last 4 years and realize the jobs that I had back at that time were more out of a necessity rather than me having any particular talent for working on a race car. But my husband, John, is the real reason I'm even here. I mean, to be honest, on our first date, he went on about tracks and racing and winning, and seriously, I thought we were talking about horses. But he was very dedicated to the sport of drag racing, and he was extremely driven and also crazy. And then our 3 daughters basically grew up in our race pits, and then they decided to follow in their dad's footsteps, and they worked hard and became race car drivers also, and I'm really proud of them.
I'll just say I'm crazy, not stupid. I know my place, and this is to all the women that support their men and all the women that do the job, that make it all possible. And I just want to say congratulations, Lori, to the greatest woman ever, my wife, and enough said.
Our first inductee tonight is Preston Davis. Now, he came out of the era in 1960s when the daring young men drove these slingshot dragsters and put their legs and everything right over the rear end and turned a 3,000 horsepower engine loose. He drove for Raymond Godman, the Tennessee Boll Weevil, and one unique thing about that car was it never went down the drag strip that it didn't have a Confederate flag flying off the roll cage. Preston wasn't afraid of nothing. And you know, it's with great honor that we put him into the Hall of Fame because his boss, Raymond Godman, is already there.
You know, when you grow up in the Memphis, Tennessee area like I did, loving cars like I did, there's 2 names that you knew, Ray Godman and Preston Davis. Always being a kid that wanted to be a full-time racer, I looked up to these guys. Preston Davis was a racer. He drove a nitro car. He traveled the country. He did all the things that I wanted to do, and I looked up to him. I was fortunate enough that I got to meet Preston as I got older. I met him when I was little. You know, he wouldn't remember that, but as I got older, you know, I met him. And, you know, and a lot of times people that you put on a pedestal, they're not what you thought they were. Well, let me tell you something. Preston Davis was what I thought he was and more.
Competition Eliminator had 7 national record holders in it when I started racing. You know, a lot of people say I was a great lever. Well, I left the way I did because I had to run against 6 other national record holders, and if you slept on that light, you were going to lose. Is that right, Clay?
Yes, sir.
I didn't mean anything personal about that.
Our next inductee is Jack Doyle. Now, that name probably doesn't ring a lot of bells with most people. He was one of the first men that hired me with Swamp Rat 1 to run in the New England states, and then later became involved when they built the Epping drag strip. which was one of the very first drag strips built in this country just for drag racing. So welcome Jack Doyle into the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame.
And then also, for those of you who have been in the men's room, we noticed that it was flooding over a little bit tonight. And I thought I was at a classy function, but I guess this is still just drag racing guys with suits on. But that's good, too. I want to thank NHRA and the Garlett's family, and of course all in this. And where I did cut my teeth in the racing world and then switch into the track world, I felt actually my credentials were not quite strong enough in either part. So this truly was a surprise when I was told about it just a few months ago. So that was very, very appreciative by me and my family, most of which is here this evening, and that's wonderful.
This edition of the Lucas Oil International Drag Racing Hall of Fame ceremonies is brought to you by Lucas Oil, made in America, sold to the world. Stage 8, the world's best locking fastener. Evapo Rust, super safe rust remover. And by Dustless Blasting. It's the future of surface preparation. Welcome back to the Lucas Oil International Drag Racing Hall of Fame induction ceremony.
We all know about sponsorships in drag racing. Here's a good example. It wouldn't exist without them. This next gentleman, Marvin Miller, you don't know who he is, but he was the sponsor of James Warren's Rain for Rent in California, one of the most feared dragsters of all time. And that dragster would not been what it was had it not been for the money that Marvin Miller put into that team. And you know, so we welcome him into the Hall of Fame because he's one of the nicest guys I ever met.
Steve Gibbs had called me mid-January. First of all, asked me if I wanted to do an induction into the Don Garlett's International Drag Racing Hall of Fame, which made my heart drop. I thought, man, this, you bet, Steve. I mean, I would love to. And then he dropped the second part of it, which was it was going to be one of my heroes, a kid growing up in Central California, going to Bakersfield every weekend with my parents. That was a place that, whether it rained out, whether my dad ran the race, whether we were spectators, that was a track that we always went to. And the Rain for Rent car was a car that I always cheered for. I had the poster on my wall. It was, you know, whether or not they were winning all the time, which they did. Nowadays that happens and you sort of get people that cheer against them. Back then it didn't matter if they were winning every race, you still cheered for them. So when Steve asked me to come make this induction, I said, in a heartbeat, I will be here. They towed out to Indianapolis for the first time to go out and see what they could do, much like what we do now. Go out and see what they could do against the big dogs. And lo and behold, they run it up when they got out there. It's a good story, and it's really sort of a little fact I didn't know. But when they got out there, they were running really well. Don Garlett's actually was running good years at the time. They were running M&H's. And Don Garlett's came over and borrowed a set of M&H's from him. He was a little bit behind the field and borrowed a set of tires. Ended up going to the final round against him. They got in the final round, and he came over and said, "Do you want the tires back?" And they said, "No, we don't want them back. We think we can beat them." Well, anyway, that 1967 race was the one where Garlett's won and ended up shaving his beard. And that's who they beat.
My brother and I, in '66, picked up a Hot Rod magazine or whatever and saw a picture of Warren and Coburn. My dad contacted a friend who knew they were going to run Fontana Dragway a couple weeks later. So we go down there as two excited kids. We're sitting on top of the bleachers, and we're thinking, okay, here they come. As soon as they pull in a Ford station wagon and the trailer behind, it blows up. The hood goes up, and everybody's going, that's James and Roger down there. So we're thinking, what? We came down here to watch some heroes or something come to our first drag race. Long story short, there was a friend from Bakersfield that had a El Camino that they converted into the push car that night, we got to ride in that push car. And from that day forward, all the way home, we kept asking, Dad, 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 can we get involved in drag racing? Can we help those guys? 3 weeks later, he went to Roger's house, walked into the garage. The garage was always open at Roger's house, and said, I'd like to help you out. If anybody knew James and Roger at that time, they didn't say much, and Roger thought my dad was crazy. But he said, you can go across town. At that time, and Ernie Hashem had the M&H dealership. He said, go buy me a set of M&H tires and bring them back. My dad went over, bought that set of tires, and from then on, it was all history.
Welcome back to the Lucas Oil International Drag Racing Hall of Fame induction ceremony.
Our next inductee is Mark Oswald, and he is one of only 4 people who ever won 2 championships from 2 different associations in the same year. Mark Oswald in the Candies and Hughes car, Raymond Beadle in the Blue Max, Don Garlitz in the 1975 Swamp Rat 22, and Lee Shepard in his Pro Stock. Now, Mark Oswald today is a crew chief and tunes. He doesn't drive anymore, but he had one heck of a driving career. Please welcome him into the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame.
1981, that was the first year that I noticed Mark Oswald. It was also my first year running funny car on the NHRA circuit. Mark and his friend, good friend, Tom Kettleman, Mark Thomas, put together a top fuel effort after running their alcohol drag show the previous year. And they went out there and got runner-up at the Summer Nationals, finished second in the IHRA point standing to Candies and Hughes. Now, when you look at those numbers, you think, doesn't sound all that impressive. But as racers in this room, we all know numbers don't always tell the whole story. Because Mark Oswald and that team went out there probably with about 30% of the budget that the big teams had at the time. And when you can go out there, and you can go out there every weekend and be competitive, not hurt the motor, go out there and get to final rounds, people take notice. Candies and Hughes, obviously they took some notice. Following year, started in top field drag show for Candies and Hughes, raced 2 seasons, won a couple events, set national records both ends, finished second in the points in the NHRA standings in '83, and said, you know what? Let's go funny car racing. How hard can that be? Yeah, we all laughed. Well, guess what? They go out there and win the championship, NHRA championship and IHRA championship. And went on to be one of the baddest cars out there. But the one thing I want to say is a lot of people say that, I know a lot about drag racing, done it, built it, drove it, wrenched it. But to be honest with you, like the old cliche, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. Mark Oswald is a master of all things drag racing. He truly can build the cars, he can tune the cars, he can drive it, he can do it all.
The Candies family. I think everybody knows that that was my first big step into racing was the break I got when I went to work for them. I went from a home-built race car to the probably one of the most premier cars in the country. So that was really a big step for me. And the really heartbreaking thing, not heartbreaking, but heart-wrenching thing for me is to see Rita Candies here tonight. I think you all know her. We all love her. And when I went to work for Candies and Hughes, they treated me like part of the family. She was like my mother. Everything except the inheritance part.
This is one of our English exhibits. This is a championship car from Santa Pod Raceway, and that's where our next inductee did most of his racing, Dennis Prudhoe. He was a European champion many times. He had all of the ET records. He set the British drag racing world record for England at 193 miles an hour. And of course, that was in a slingshot. And he also held the absolute record for slingshots for the whole world at 6.04 seconds at one point in his career. So please welcome Dennis Priddle into the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame.
I'm not going to go into all of my drag racing history. Just one or two things I'd like to mention. In 1973, both Clive Scott and another top British driver and myself came over to California to participate in the Winter Nationals. Everybody should remember it because it rained for 2 weekends solid, and we were obviously blamed for all of that rain. In the build-up to that race, the NHRA had asked us if we could, we were prepared to do some promotional events. And Dave McClellan took me along to the LA Sports Writers Association luncheon. And I thought, well, free lunch, gotta be worth going to. Anyway, we were sat down there, and they were introducing various basketball players and football players. And there I am chewing on a very, very tender piece of prime rib. And the master of ceremonies said, and now all the way from England is Dennis Priddle. Well, first of all, I nearly choked on the piece of prime rib. And then I had a lot of trouble controlling some of the muscles in my lower body. Anyway, I tried my best to impromptu to make a short speech. And in the end of that, I was somewhat surprised when a gentleman got up and said, "Excuse me, can you explain to me what drag racing is?" Here I am in California, as far as I'm concerned, the mecca of drag racing, and I'm asked that by a journalist. Anyway, I was gone. I was okay then.
But no matter how different he talks about, the FIA and running one way and running the other way, no matter how different things may seem over there in England, Dennis, a lot of things are the same between British racers and American racers, because there are a lot of guys in this room that also have trouble controlling the muscles in their lower body.
This edition of the Lucas Oil International Drag Racing Hall of Fame ceremonies is being brought to you by Lucas Oil, made in America, sold to the world. Steel rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. C-Max, tested, trusted performance. And by Dustless Blasting. It's the future of surface preparation. Welcome back to the Lucas Oil International Drag Racing Hall of Fame induction ceremonies.
In the museum, we have very famous gassers: Barbara Hamilton, K.S. Pittman, George Montgomery. But one of the most famous ones was out on the West Coast. Gaius Ronda had a wonderful career and then was burned terribly in a fire, and that ended it. But tonight we're going to induct him into the Drag Racing Hall of Fame for all the work he did on the West Coast in these Gaius cars.
I'm here tonight to induct Gaius Ronda. And Gaius did win a lot of races. He set records. He was a world champion in top stock. And with Les Ritchie helping him, that was a tough team, a duo of tuners. They ran very, very well everywhere they went. And he did stand out for all of those reasons. From his heads-up super stock cars, he had a Ford Thunderbolt. Gaius drove a 4-speed AFX car. Then he went to a supercharged Mustang funny car. So he did a lot of things in a time when the sport was changing rapidly. It's been over 46 years since he made his last run down the drag strip. I think what made Gaius stand out was Gaius. I don't know if Steve Gibbs is in the room tonight, but I was trying to do some research so I could come up here and pay tribute to a man who deserves this and find out more behind the scenes stuff about Gaius Ronda. And Steve Gibbs was a track manager at Irwindale Raceway from 1966 to 1968. And he said, "Jack, back then, we could book certain drivers in. It wasn't the national event scene like it is today. It was a very different era. And you'd book people into your racetrack so that you could sell more tickets and make a profit and keep your racetrack open." He said, "There was nobody I booked more than Gaius Ronda in my time there." He says, "In fact, When I got the call to go manage a new racetrack in Corpus Christi, Texas in 1969, I paid gas to come out there, to tow all the way from Southern California to come out and run. That's how highly he was regarded, not just by his competitors, but clearly by the fans and by the track promoters, which was your bread and butter when you were a driver in those days. If right now you were in the banquet room at Gainesville and they're inducting all the people, you've already gone up there, you've got your trophy for being inducted into the Hall of Fame, and that's the audience there. Is there a message that, and keep in mind the people in that room, a lot of them are your peers, and a lot of them grew up watching you race. Is there a message you want to give to all of them now that you're in the Hall of Fame?
I am happier than hell that I can't even tell you how good I feel about it because you're doing it.
Steve determined that it was good if every year we went to Daytona because that's where all the media hung out. So we would go to Daytona, we'd get a condo on the beach, and the NASCAR guys hated us because we would go out for the start of the Daytona 500 and we would talk to all the media guys, and then Steve and I would go back to the condo on the beach, put on our shorts and sit out there and watch the girls on the beach and watch the race on TV. And then about the last 10 laps, we would get dressed and we'd drive back to the racetrack. And by the time we got there, the riders would be through writing their stories and we'd pick them up and take them to Gene's Steakhouse for dinner. And talk drag racing all night. And the NASCAR guys hated that. But it was a great intro for drag racing. And it's those kind of things that he thought of that nobody else would think of. I would never have thought of doing that. But it worked, and it worked well.
Big, those nice hotels we put you in, I'd get flack about it. Wally and Big didn't always agree on everything, and but we would show him the front page of the papers, and Wally would tolerate Big and me. And Denzi, and I won't take too much time here, because this is a favorite award of the night, it's the last one. But we used to entertain right at this room next door here, and this is Gainesville Hilton. We had 7 of the major newspapers in Florida staff this race. Very gratifying that get that kind of coverage. Well, we had a party for Saturday night next door here, and with their wives. And remember the first year we did it, I went to see Dallas Gardner the next morning. I said, Dallas, we took some people to dinner last night, and we spent probably a little too much money. He said, what'd you spend, a few hundred? I said, about 24. We were in the back of the ticket building that he had just built, or had built, and he said, come with me. So he takes me to the front of the ticket building. There were 6 windows open, and there are lines 30 to 40 yards long at all 6 windows. He said, that 2,400 would come through those windows in the next 30 seconds.
And John's one daughter married an IndyCar racer, and we were at the SEMA show earlier at the end of last year, and he said, you know, I was so disappointed. He said, I grew up in drag racing. I hope my daughters will grow up and marry a drag racer, and she married an IndyCar guy. And I said, you think you're disappointed? You should hear his parents tell the story. Nice to have Mike Dunn here, the president. I don't want you to think Mike is taking this presidency thing to heart, but we had the rehearsal earlier in the day, and he said, hey, Bob, do you think when you introduce me, they could play Hail to the Chief when I come up? I told him no, Peter Clifford already requested that, so we couldn't give it to both of them. So.